Plan and Development Committee meeting for Thursday, May the 9th, 2019, and also recognize that we have been sitting here now for 6 months, and that's very exciting for everybody, and we've managed to make it, and we're still talking, and it's really appreciate the time working with this group and this board. It's been very excellent. This morning, I'd like to also acknowledge that we are meeting on the territory of the Sechelt Nation, and as we always do here. Call the meeting to order at 9:30, and I'd like to first move adoption of the agenda. I'd like to, in the agenda with the agreement of the board, just slightly reorganize something. I'd like to bring the item 8 up to just ahead of reports, as a first report, and that will allow the Chinook Swim Club to get back into the water. Okay, so we'll bring that item 8 up as the first report received. With that change, is there anything else changed? Move the agenda, please. Moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. So we have 2 delegations presentations this morning. I welcome Ian Wynne, and I welcome Jacqueline Gillis joining him to talk about B&B on behalf of accommodation owners. So please, Mr. Wynne, Ms. Gillis, you can proceed.
Thank you, Chair Beamish, and thank you, directors. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today. Kind of odd sitting on this side of that table, huh? Yes, I'm here today. My name is Ian Wynne, just for the record. Ian Wynne, I'm the owner-operator of Marion's on the Coast Seaside Retreat, located in Williamson's Landing, not far from Langdale. And joining me at the table is Jacqueline Gillis, and Jacqueline is a manager of Beyond B&B Management, and I'll explain a little bit more of the type of work that she does in my discussion here that I have for you. So, as typical, I've written things down so that I can go through it fairly quickly and give you opportunity for answering questions. So, I will read through this. A little bit of the background first is that along with my wife, who had requested the delegation originally, but she couldn't be here today because of health reasons. But with my wife, we've been B&B owner-operators for 12 years on the Sunshine Coast. 3 of those years were in Tawanik, and 9 years at Williamson's Landing. And we have 1 suite with accommodations for 4 people, and we're well suited for a family, and we only do the 1 rental at a time. We started off as a traditional B&B serving full breakfast from a menu, but that's now evolved into just a continental breakfast. Seems to be more of the norm nowadays in B&Bs. We are extremely pet friendly and cater to that market of people wishing to bring their pets along. About 90% of the people that come and stay with us bring a dog with them, and our occupancy rate is about 100% in the peak season, and 60% in the shoulder seasons, and 20% in the off-season winter time. We are on site in the same building as our guests at all times during the rental, and we've never had any issues with noise or parking or any cause for our neighbors to have any concerns. Jacqueline and her business partner have been in business here on the coast for about 2 years and manage the rental of 8 entire houses or cottages located between Half Moon Bay and Gibsons. So they are off-site managers, and their business serves the demand for management of multi-bedroom houses and cottages where the property owner is not typically a coast resident. So we represent quite a broad spectrum from the traditional B&B to the newly developing market for larger accommodation rentals. A little history of what the SCRD has been doing in regards to bylaw amendments to regulate B&Bs, and it goes back 7 years to 2002 when it became quite active. It actually goes back to 1992, but but it's been really a issue of concern since 2016. The staff report that you'll see later provides details and a timeline of those activities, but no amendments have happened yet. So where are we today with the advent of online booking platforms such as Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, etc.? Over the last 8 years, predominantly these platforms have provided that service, and the business and the market demands for B&Bs and short-term rental accommodations has changed dramatically. Many local government jurisdictions in the province, including the SCRD, are struggling to catch up with the regulations needed to provide the balances required to enhance the economic benefits that this type of business provides to the tourism industry and respect the values of the neighborhoods in which the rentals take place. The SCRD is no exception. We are in a catch-up mode, and the bylaw amendments before you today are intended to address the issues and concerns that are happening now and evolving rapidly in our communities. What the proposed amendments don't address are the changing short-term rental market and the significant economic benefits that this type of business brings to the Sunshine Coast. However, we need to start a process of amending the bylaws to meet the current state of the business and continue to review this rapidly evolving business and the challenges that it presents in order to achieve balance in our communities. So, to the proposed amendments. The proposed amendments are reflective of much public engagement and consultation, and staff are to be commended for listening to and responding to much of that feedback. However, there are proposed amendments that are too restrictive, don't address the needs of the current market, or require some clarification. In particular, the restriction of 2 bedrooms per dwelling with few exceptions, regardless of the zoning or parcel size, does not reflect the needs and realities of today's business operators. This is especially evident in Bylaw 310, which is more restrictive than Bylaw 337, and there really should be consistency in the 2 bylaws. A workable solution was proposed at first reading with a scalable allowance of bedrooms dependent on parcel sizing and zoning. That has now changed with what's presented for second reading. Another option may be to have Bylaw 310 match Bylaw 337 with the addition of allowance for a bed and breakfast inn. Maintaining the current bylaws as now proposed at second reading is not moving forward to address the current reality and needs of the business. Another point within the second reading of the amendments, the restriction of a maximum of 2 occupants per bedroom is an unacceptable situation for many families. Mom and dad and 1 older child or even 2 younger children staying in the same room makes the Sunshine Coast an affordable vacation destination. In comparison to the high return ferry fares to Vancouver Island or the high cost of gas to drive to the interior, it's easy to understand why the family tourism industry is exploding on the Sunshine Coast. Significant restrictions of 2 occupants per bedroom will be a tourism business killer. This must be opened up to include parents and children in the same room. And this was in first reading, there was that provision in there. The TUP process is an acceptable process for off-site management. However, the process is complex and will require a great deal of staff time to manage it. TUP fees must reflect the actual cost to manage this service. Non-compliance to TUP conditions must be significantly fined, or it will just become a cost of doing business. First offense, for example, could be a $500 fine. Second offense, a $1,000 fine. Third offense, the TUP is revoked. Enforcement was a common theme at the public meetings and by APCs. Bylaw enforcement resources could be significant, and the taxpayer should not be expected to take on the costs of management and enforcement. There's also a few points of clarification in bylaw 310 and 337. A housekeeping unit is vaguely defined in bylaw 337, but I couldn't find a definition for it at all in 310. What is a housekeeping unit and what is an example of it? And specifically in 310 Part B, 2B, C, the average floor area of all bedrooms shall not exceed 28 square meters. Is all the total of the bedrooms, or should the word be any, so that any bedroom cannot exceed 28 square meters? This is also not reflective of current practices where an open space suite might be larger than a conventional bedroom. And finally, in the big picture of tourism in British Columbia, the Sunshine Coast is small but growing rapidly. A point of great confusion to our tourists is the different accommodation offerings with different respective rules and regulations. They don't understand the 4 local government structure in such a small geographic area and are confused by what they can rent in different areas of the coast. So perhaps this is a great opportunity for collaboration on short-term rental accommodation bylaws in all jurisdictions on the Sunshine Coast. So thank you for this opportunity to speak to you on this important topic. I did speak with many B&B operators prior to appearing before you today, and so a lot of this feedback that I've just spoken about comes from them. A lot of them couldn't be here today. With that, I'll turn it over back to the board. If you have any questions, like I say, Jacqueline is here to speak to off-site management and the TUP process and things like that, which is not the type of business that I have, but she might be able to answer your questions regarding that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn, for your presentation, and I'll just turn it over to the board. Does the board have questions at this time? Director Seegers?
Thank you. Where did you talked about the 28, I think is it square feet? What is it, 28 for the rooms? And I mean, I read it, and what I read was that it was the average area for the bedrooms. So I'm wondering where you found the...
Yes, it's in bylaw 310, and it was specifically in 310 Part B, 2BC.
Part B,
the average floor area for all bedrooms shall not exceed 28 square meters.
Say that again. Read that again. Sorry.
The average floor area for all bedrooms shall not exceed 28 square meters.
Okay. Yeah. So it needs some clarification. I think what they're getting at is that you would take the area of each bedroom and average them, and the average can be over 28, but it's maybe not clear in the way it's written.
It's not.
Okay. And sorry, that was 310 Part B.
310 Part B, 2BC.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Ties?
Yeah, on that note, I was just also wondering if you've got all you have is one 600 square foot studio, how are you going to get the 28 square meter average? So that was just my question, is if all you're renting out is one bedroom and it's in a studio, you're not going to hit the 28 square meter average.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, good question. I did make a point of that. Was that in a suite, something larger where you've got the bed and a sofa and television, it's all in one room, then it would be typically larger than 28 square meters, which is 300 square feet. So what do you do in that case? Do you put up a divider wall and create a bedroom? Not realistic. So.
Any other questions of the board? Director Pratt?
Thank you. I think I have a couple questions for Ms. Gillis. Now, with being that you are a B&B rental management company, have you had an opportunity to review the the temporary use permit process that's being proposed, and review it with any of your clients, and just your feedback, any feedback on that so far?
I haven't had a chance to review it really heavily, honestly. I only found out about this meeting a few days ago. We've been kind of crazy busy. I have gone through it. I don't have a big problem with the temporary use permit process. We do a similar process in Sechelt, and it's actually the Sechelt one requires a $1,000 deposit as well. So our clients are in compliance with that. I don't think clients would have a problem with it. When we take clients on, we tell them whatever the compliance is, that if they don't want it, then they can't be our clients. But I don't see it as a bad process. I actually think it's a good idea. I don't have any issues with it. I don't have any issues with what Ian's talking about, where we would have like a graduated fine system. I think that's fine. Then it rewards good operators and it punishes bad ones. We have no issues with any of that because we don't have complaints.
Director Pratt?
And then also a follow-up for Ms. Gillis. I've heard your presentation about your company, of course, at my real estate office. If you could just tell us how far you are away from your rentals that you take on to manage, and how long it takes you to, if you do have a complaint, because how long it takes you to get to like your furthest away rental, like what you would guarantee, because I know one of the biggest concerns that our community has is the enforcement and not being able to contact a non-resident property owner that's using their.
So my business partner, Sarah, was living in Gibson. She's now in Roberts Creek because she is like me and a renter, and you take whatever you can get on the coast. But luckily, Roberts Creek worked out. So we have a couple of houses in Langdale, so that would be our furthest away. We're looking at possibly taking a house in Half Moon Bay. I live in West Sechelt. So as of right now, those are the distances. I have no idea what that is in kilometers. I'm sorry, I'm not good with that kind of thing. So, maybe 10 to 15 minutes away. I'm 2 minutes away from one of our properties. It just depends on where the property is. We don't generally have to go to the property to deal with complaints. We've had, at our property so far, we've had 2 complaints total from neighbors to us, not to the FCRD or anything about noise. We immediately messaged the guests, told them, this is really serious, you can't be loud, and they stopped. I mean, I know it sounds, if they had continued, we would have gone at 3 a.m. and, been tired and knocked on the door. But a friend of mine actually brought up a really good point, which is the distance issue it's almost moot, in that if the party or whatever is happening, if it's a domestic or if it's serious enough that they feel that like the RCMP or something should be called, we can't go anyway. I mean, Sarah and I are like 5'2" and 5'3". We're not, we can't go and take down a massive party or like really rowdy people. So in that case, we would call the RCMP and we would encourage the neighbors to. Like, we don't want that stuff either. We haven't had that case yet, so I don't know. But we've never had to go to a house other than like a plumbing emergency or something. That happened a week ago. I had to go because there was a leak, so that was maybe a 10-minute drive. So yeah, those are the distances we have.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. Have you ever had a situation, we're looking at limiting numbers of people. We're dealing with one in Sechelt where like they'll have 15, 16 people in a house, and then there's cars everywhere, and it's a huge impact. Do the places that you manage limit the number of people, and how do you deal with it if they say, well, we want to bring extra people?
So we have a house that sleeps 14. It parks 14, like it parks, it'll park 7 cars. It's a large house. We don't have houses that require street parking. We don't generally, our rule basically is number of bedrooms plus 2. So if it has 4 bedrooms, it'll sleep 10. Because it'll be a pull-out couch. What we find is if a house has 4 bedrooms, then it should have, usually it'll have ample parking to, accommodate all of the people staying. Part of it is the way that you filter. We had a client or a guest request, we have a house that sleeps 9, and he's like, can we bring another person? This was last week. We actually have to cancel that booking. This reminded me this morning. We said no. He said it doesn't make sense. Oh, well, they can sleep in the yard. They can bring a tent. Oh, no, they can't. No. We don't want people sleeping in the yard. That's what we do. So that one, he kept pushing and pushing, and we just said, you're going to have to cancel your booking. It's not a perfect system. I get that. We don't live on site. We don't. It's not the same. It's not going to be as good as somebody living upstairs and renting out a suite. We're the next best thing. It's not a perfect idea, but I mean, if somebody, requests to book, because all of our, they can't just book, they have to request with us. Some of them will allow instant booking, but we can cancel it. When somebody says, oh, it's just a girls' weekend, we're going to have some fun, no, declined. If it's a bunch of guys are coming out, we just want it, no, declined. Like, we're really picky because we don't want 3 a.m. phone calls saying that people are partying and making noise. We don't want people going, there's a bunch of people on the beach having a fire and there's a fire ban. That's a hassle for us too. So we try to limit it as much as we can. Did that answer your question? Sorry.
Director Sears?
So follow up on that. So I know you and your partner are doing this. Do you know, are there others on the coast who are doing this?
It's a good question because we actually have gotten so busy that we have a waiting list. So we've been trying to find other companies that will do this. From what we know, there is one other company called LSC Properties. They say on their website that they do vacation similar to us, but they're also a property management company generally. So this would be more like a side business. There's a woman on Craigslist. I don't know her name because the ad just says call Jay. It's not me. And that is it. There's a few cleaners that do it kind of on the side, but there aren't that many dedicated businesses where it's like us. It's our full-time jobs. It's all we do. So, yeah.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'll take a question on waste disposal. So you might have a bunch of, in 1 week you could have 2 or 3 clients. So how do you do your waste management?
So all of our owners sign a contract with us saying that they will pay between $40 and $80 for garbage disposal. We take it after every stay. Mostly because I don't want to clean garbage up after bears get into it. So we don't even wait for the district to come get it because that might mean garbage sitting out overnight and that's not okay. So we take it after every stay. We sort recycling. If a composting program, it's funny, we were talking about this the other night. If a composting program came in, I think we would try and encourage guests to use it, but that's something we would have to put into our procedure manuals and stuff for our guests because it is a little bit more complicated. We sort the recycling if they don't, and then we take it to Salish. If it's Seashell, we take it to Salish. If it's Gibson's, we take it to the Gibson's Depot.
Okay, see no more further questions. Oh, sorry, Director
Yeah,
Sears.
sorry, follow up on that. So you take the garbage. Do you then haul it to the landfill yourself?
Mhm.
Is that what you do? Okay.
Yeah, or we hire a company. I mean, we hired somebody a couple days ago because there was a lot from one of our guests, so we just hire somebody to do it. I just often will do it myself because it's easier, and that way we know it's getting done.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both for your presentation, and we will, as you know, be discussing this later on the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Our next presentation this morning is from the Sunshine Coast Community Solar Association. And welcome, Mr. Olson. And we have a presentation, information in the package under Annex A for the board's attention. Thank you. Welcome. And invite you to proceed when you're ready. No, mic on. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning, Chairman Beamish, directors. We're here on behalf of the Sunshine Coast Solar Association. We're on a committee that was asked to look at things that the Solar Association could do to help or promote the solar adoption through the bylaw 30 or 310. Now, we're here because, not to get into things that are a little too far in the future, but we're at a stage of technological development with solar. This could be a disruptive technology, and I think it's something we all have to be aware of, and it's time, I think, for the leaders of communities to step up and promote solar programs. We are a little bit behind other communities, other jurisdictions. You'll see there we've submitted other British Columbia municipalities who have adopted similar things that we're proposing now. Just for myself, I was asked to join the committee because I have expertise with solar installations, and they were struggling. And they asked Donovan Whistler, who's also a member, and he's built one of the first net zero homes on the coast with solar and electric car chargers, and he has 2 electric cars. And so we would like to propose a adoption of solar as opposed to other green energy or renewable solutions. This is something that we've moved ahead with solar because we believe it's the best answer that's available now. The technology is there, it's proven, and the rest of the world is moving ahead with it now. There's various renewable solutions available that we would rather not even discuss at this point, but if you had any questions, we would certainly like to answer them and do the best we could to alleviate any misunderstandings with our proposal or any complications that you see it might cause in the development community.
Sure. I'd like to, maybe I can make a couple comments. As Dennis mentioned, I had built a house that was basically a net zero build, and to me this was kind of, going into new territory. The concept's been around for a while, I guess. So it was an opportunity for me to explore actually making this happen, and so this build was done in Sechelt. So when I sort of talk about net zero, I basically, a lot of this usually is focused more on the energy use of the building itself. But once you start looking at that, you can see that really this can be expanded to include integrating other aspects of what a building involves. And we know that a building involves the transportation, like you get there from your residence or workplace or a place of whatever might be an institutional facility. You get there by transportation, and so that could be walking, it could be cycling, but of course a big part of it is vehicles and that. Right now, just to bounce around a bit, but we know that the SCRD was one of the early adopters, if you will, of the BC solar water regulation, and that is actually one of our sort of points that we're trying to make, is that was a residential build only, and there's no reason this can't be expanded to all buildings, and expanded to include solar PV, and integrating with electric vehicle charging. The net zero concept can be expanded, includes water, rainwater harvesting, and it is in some jurisdictions in that. So it's a kind of an expansive approach to renewable energy conservation. So I guess in that context, bringing it back to bylaw 310 review, that's what we're trying to promote. That there's a great opportunity during a process like that to integrate these things. And the last thing maybe I'll just mention, the previous presentation about the short-term, or I guess in the case of bed and breakfast, I'd also suggest that is another opportunity. There's no reason, there was a reference made there to people coming up here as opposed to maybe the interior or Vancouver Island. They're getting there by driving. Well, this is an area where these concepts can be integrated and encouraged. As a matter of policy and promoting. So just kind of an aside there. But actually, we'd like to hear questions from you. I think we've talked enough.
Yeah, essentially what we're proposing is that we're not saying you have to put solar panels on the roof of your house. We're just saying build homes that are solar ready. Build homes that have the wiring put in place for the car chargers. And we have so many jurisdictions already have this in place, and a number of the developers on the coast already are proposing to do this, but it's not included in the bylaw anywhere with any Sechelt, Gibsons, or the SCRD. Being solar and EV ready is a relatively inexpensive thing to do. in the neighborhood of $300 or $400 per unit. I don't think we're asking much of the developers here to do this. And not saying that we can't incentivize it some other way to speed it up a little bit, like we'd like to see, but perhaps if you have any questions before we run out of our 10 minutes.
Thank you. I'll open up to the board now for, well, first of all, I'd like the board to kind of motion to receive the presentation. We have a copy in the package. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Now, questions from the board. I have a question. I'll start off if I could. Why do we have to incentivize developers to do it by putting in bylaw? Why wouldn't it, because it does make sense, why wouldn't they just do it as kind of a opportunity to make this, their house, better than the house down the street that's for sale? What is kind of causing them not to do that?
Yeah. So I guess,
Yeah.
sorry, pardon me. So I think it's a good question, because I'd like to think in an ideal world that's
Yeah.
how.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That for, that developers, owners would just do this, but this is also a matter of, trying to avoid reinventing the wheel every step of the way. And so I think it's important, like in an ideal world, these should be provincial policies in that. Mm-hmm. And right now, these type of things are really up to each jurisdiction to implement. And so it creates a bit of complication because each place is sort of reinventing the wheel as they go along. And at least, the initial ones, they get a lot of ideas, but they're not necessarily, they need evolving. And so you get a mishmash of results. In the document that it was produced, I made a reference, for example, to the CalGreen, basically California's green sort of energy construction code. And basically that's an example of thing done would be equivalent to a provincial level setting standards. And for example, I made reference to the BC Solar Hot Water Ready regulation. Mm-hmm. And that is a water ready regulation, pardon me. But that is an example of a provincial level sort of standard, if you will. That's the ideal thing to have.
Specifically to the question that Mr. Beamish was asking there about why developers aren't doing this.
Yeah.
There's a couple of reasons. There's a staggering ignorance out there about solar and electric vehicles. There are people that literally have no clue. Most of the population actually is in that category, unfortunately. I come across it every day. An educational role from government positions would be really useful. Just keep pounding it out there that this is the way we're going to go. This is the future. There's no denying it at the moment. So holding seminars and public information meetings and anything you can do to help people understand it. And the developers are in the same boat. A lot of them don't understand it particularly, and it's you see it in not just the developers, but the designers, the architects, the engineers. They're typically 3 or 4 years behind what the actual development situation is at the moment. They're very reluctant to taking on anything new or supporting it. Solar capture of buildings. Mm-hmm. We are still building houses that we built with same designs 80, 90 years ago, whereas the rest of the world is moving ahead with structures that are designed for solar capture. These are the kind of things that we need to educate people about.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. In your document that we have in our package on page 3, it talks about the BC Energy Step Code regulation, and I know that the governments on the Sunshine Coast will be incorporating that and implementing it going forward, but what you're saying in the document is Step 5 is the one we need to get to actually have what you're proposing in place.
That's a passive home, net zero. The homes will produce as much energy as they use. This is already legislation in California and a number of other places.
Right. So what you're proposing is that instead of waiting until we get to Step 5, that we actually incorporate these two pieces, at least the preparation for solar and EV charging.
Yes.
Now, and then we can still go along and implement these steps as
As
we
we go,
intend
yes,
to do.
that's
Okay,
right.
thank you.
And maybe just a point of clarification. The BC Energy Step Code is quite limited in what it does, and so it doesn't include any solar-ready requirements. It's more of what I would call a marketing thing. So it's important to have those in, and that's why that needs to be done at the moment at each sort of jurisdiction level. And there is nothing there about EV charging. So that may change because, now the BC Energy Step Code is part of the Clean BC program, if you will, and it'll be up to the provincial government to, it's out of our jurisdiction, but it's up to them. They may make changes. But the other thing about that, a net zero thing, that whatever step code level you get to, implementing net zero is a matter of adding active on-site energy production, if you will. So whatever step code level something gets to, it could be made net zero by just adding the solar to make up for that. So hopefully that isn't too confusing, but it's...
Director Pratt.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm a huge proponent of solar, having come from a school district board. So, of course, our school district here on the Sunshine Coast has actually 4 schools that have solar arrays on them, because Elphinstone has heats all their hot water with solar panels. And Pender Harbour Secondary has the largest solar array for a public school in all of British Columbia, which is pretty fantastic. Huge proponent of solar. The only thing that concerns me is I'm curious about how Canadian and provincial building code sees mandating solar readiness into buildings. If it fits in with the current building codes. And the reason I ask that is I was recently at a meeting where it was brought up as a cautionary about bringing in these energy step codes and about bringing in energy savings as a municipality or as a regional district, because if it doesn't fit in with the Canadian and the provincial building codes, then it potentially puts the municipality or the regional district at liability if something happens. So I'm just curious about how that fits in before we, ask builders and developers to do things.
As a regulation in the step code, that they have to do this?
Yes, because the provincial and the Canadian building codes, they say one thing, and sometimes you have a different government come in with a policy that says we want all buildings to be energy efficient, or we want you to do this, but it doesn't necessarily, it goes further than the building code does. And if you're ahead of the curve as a local government, you take on the liability of what happens from an insurance side. So I'm just curious, if you're asking us to regulate or put into bylaw energy, like solar hookups and all of that, does that fit in with the current building? And this getting to be a kind of a technical, I'm wondering.
Sounds like
It was staff. It sounds more like a staff question, if my rambling has made sense.
Okay. Well, the thing is, as far as I can tell, all these type of things have to be done to be code compliant, with existing codes. And for example, some of this is a mix between building code and electrical code stuff. And the electrical code certainly has had, its sections dealing with renewable energy for some time, and these things evolve. The same with EV charging and that. There may be some issues with some of those things in terms of where they are in the code, but as far as I can tell, all these things are covered under code stuff. But I think what you're also referring to is when these become maybe optional things that if you're opting into. And so I think what we're talking about here is, when it comes to things like EV, solar, is appropriate readiness things. And you're already there with solar in terms of the solar hot water ready, because that regulation more or less covers solar PV. It's just that there could be it would be worth looking at and reviewing some of the fine points on it. And it would be really nice to see the provincial government clarify that further. So yeah, I don't think it's really an issue, but you're right. I think it's some things that need to be given some thought to make sure that you're not putting something out that's going to end up be a stumbling block either. So does that, I don't know if that answers your question very well.
Sorry, staff, did you have a comment on that? Or?
That was technical.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Some of the suggestions that the delegation is referencing do relate to building standards, and the Provincial Building Act doesn't allow a local government's building bylaw to have requirements that are not in the BC Building Code without the province's specific approval. In this case, staff don't have specific information about provisions in the STEP code that might bear on the specific suggestions that are being made. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Taz?
All right. Well, this might become a little bit convoluted. I'll try to be as clear and concise as I can. First of all, I have an 11 kilowatt array on my house, so I know what it's all about. But I guess my question is more to staff as to what can be done on our behalf to make things. What are our mechanisms to make things more solar ready and to implement chargers and those kind of things? Do we have any kind of tools to make that happen? And then, while at the same time being aware that not every property is solar friendly because you need the southern exposure. I don't know if you want to be cutting down 100 trees just so that you get your solar panels some sunlight. So, I mean, there needs to be some give and take, and I don't know if there's a way that we can do some GIS mapping where we can say this is a solar friendly property or something like that. So in the end, I'm just kind of curious as if there is a way that we can encourage it, while at the same time realizing that, you know, why make every house solar ready when you're on a north facing aspect and you really don't get sunlight, that kind of thing.
Well, that's a good point. We've done a survey of the Sunshine Coast. About 60% of the homes on the Sunshine Coast are ideal for solar, and about 20 are marginal, and 20 are in the bush.
And a quick comment to one of your points there, Andres, is, you know, if a site isn't suitable, that's already part of the BC Solar Hot Water Regulation. And in other words, it's an opt-out thing. If the site truly is not suitable, then the provision is not, it doesn't need to be followed. And that's part of it right now. So those are important points. I think there are some ways that these things could be encouraged. In terms of part of the planning process and documents, like maybe you can't require them, but you could have a process where these things are encouraged for people making proposals to that they actually do some of this, actually do some of the planning, and maybe a way to do this would be with some pilot projects, incentivized to get a track record. There's another way that it could be done potentially is that when you're trying to sort of, let's say, under the bylaw review, you're trying to open things up to new ideas. Possibly some of these things could be encouraged by making it easier to get a permit if some of these features are included. There might be some ways that could be done.
This is disruptive technology. Yeah. It's going to be messy. There's no easy answers anywhere. But there's a willingness, and I think we're preaching to the converted here, but we have to get it out, the message out to the rest of the community that this is the future, and we have to move towards it for other reasons than just economics. You save a lot of money, of course. If you have an electric car and those solar panels, it's a no-brainer there. But we're also helping the planet a lot, and these are also important things that have to be considered.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. This is actually a question for staff. There are people now who build with solar, so the BC Building Code must have guidelines in it already for how that has to be done, because our building inspectors need to be able to have the guidelines to be able to ensure that it's compliant. So I think we're talking two different things here. We're talking step code, which may or may not include it, and may just be marketing, etc., and BC Building Code. And I would have to believe BC Building Code already has requirements for how it has to be built for solar. So if we were to say that all houses have to be compliant, like ready for solar and EV charging, the BC Building Code already has that in. So we would be able to do that. So I'd be looking to staff to say, I mean, that kind of, I get where we can't do something that's not in the BC Building Code. I get that. But I'm sure that this already exists. It has to, because it's out there.
Staff response?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. So if staff understand the question, are there existing tools in building code to enable solar installation, solar energy readiness? And on that, staff would agree, yes, the tools are there. And referring back to staff's earlier comment, the concern would be the ability to regulate as a requirement that proceed. In general, to the Director Tice's earlier question, staff understands from the materials supplied by the delegation and the presentation today that there may be a number of barrier removal opportunities, education opportunities that can be incorporated as business as usual with particularly the building service that SCRD operates, perhaps planning as well. And so staff would be pleased to pursue that conversation with the Solar Association outside of today. Thanks.
I think as a comment, I would just make myself as well that we're all struggling with this issue, and I agree it's disruptive technology. And the province, though, is going to force it. And by 2040, they're talking about having no more gas-powered cars to be sold. So that means we're all going to have to be electrically ready at our houses. We struggle with this in Gibson's as well as to whether we require that or whether homeowners choose it as an option with their architect and their builder, whether builders put it in as an incentive. The decision that my wife and I made to purchase the house that we are in across the street from one that we had looked at was that the house we were in had gas and the other one did not have gas. So it was an option in that house that, hey, that's something we want. So looking at different options, and that's the incentive for the builder right there, so they can ask a little bit more, cover their costs, and it's something there. But we will at some point in time, I agree. We have already, Director Tice has sponsored a resolution in the province to declare a provincial climate emergency. This is consistent with that. We have to look at how we're going to respond to an emergency and what we do, and that's going to color a lot of decisions we make going forward if we want to be true to that process. So we need to be considering these things, and I know Gibson's is talking about this as well, so that it will be a good conversation. Director Seegers.
So given the conversation around the table, I'd like to make a recommendation that we refer this report to staff to look into it and bring it back to committee.
Be moved, seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Okay, we're now going to move on to reports, and if I could have a motion from the board to receive all of the reports and all of the minutes that are included on the agenda package and the communications. That way you don't have to do this each time. So the reports, the minutes, and the communications. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, that takes care of one set of resolutions we don't have to do again. We had agreed that we would move up the item 8, which is the to the Manager of Recreation and Community Partnerships and Manager of Facility Services and Parks regarding the report on the Chinook Swim Club rental request. I'll refer that to Mr. Hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Following the Chinook Club's delegation presentation earlier this year, staff reviewed and researched each of the club's requests and have recommended ways to address, in whole or in part, the asks made by the club, while aligning with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and continuing to provide quality recreation opportunities for all patrons. Staff suggests that the current lap pool procedures provide sufficient flexibility to enhance lane access for user groups, such as the Chinook Club, through special events or additional rental time. Staff have already begun action on the special event part of the request, working with the club, and can immediately discuss additional rental time. On lane fees, staff analysis points to a recommendation to establish a youth rate for aquatic rentals. A rate of $17 an hour is recommended based on the average of surveyed public pools with youth rates. A financial analysis suggests that the greater demand for rental time that might be enabled by reduced rates would effectively make the change revenue neutral. A bylaw amendment can be prepared on board direction. The annual maintenance shutdown time for the pool is guided by a number of factors, including operating demands in STRD's other recreation facilities and the groundwater table, as groundwater pressure poses a risk of floating an empty pool basin, causing damage to the facility. Use patterns and effect on other programs are also a consideration. Advancing the shutdown to early May versus the current June time could be an incremental improvement for athlete training, would fit well with seasonal use patterns for the Seashell Aquatic Center and with SCRD operations. An early May shutdown appears to be an incremental improvement over the current approach. An engineering review of groundwater pressure is recommended as a risk management strategy and could guide planning for an earlier spring shutdown. If directed, staff would prepare a 2020 budget proposal for this work that would consider any staffing impacts as well for future committee consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. And first of all, I'd like to thank staff for a very thorough report and a very thorough approach to the direction from council on this issue. And Sarah Hind, I'd like to congratulate you and the Chinook Swim Club for all your successes that watch closely in the paper. And I don't know if the Special Olympics is part of your program, but I note the success the Special Olympics swimmer recently had too, so they really congratulate you for a very valued program on the coast. So with that said, I'll turn to the board for discussion. Director McMahon.
Well, I'd like to move staff recommendations.
The recommendations are moved and seconded, and that is the three recommendations. They coordinate with the swim club use of the pool, policy to schedule whole pool special events and to schedule additional lanes access, that the community recreation facilities and fees and charges bylaw be amended to establish a youth pool, lane pool rental rate, and that a 2020 budget proposal be prepared to support engineering and staffing required to reschedule the annual maintenance shutdown of the Seashell Aquatic Center from June to May. Director McMahon?
Yes. In view of the fact that seasonal droughts are starting earlier than they used to, I think looking at rescheduling the pool closure is a very sensible thing to do. And you know, any other ways that we can look at reducing our water usage in the facility would be very helpful.
Director Ties?
First of all, thanks to staff for an excellent report. And if we weren't having a water issue, I think I would have thought that August would have been a great month. But then I looked at the numbers and I was blown away as to how many people go to the pool in the summertime. There's lots of ocean to be had. But so I think the recommendations are great as is, and I'd like to endorse them.
Seeing no, Director Seegers?
Sorry, just one clarification. So the way this is written, I understand this will not be implemented for this year, but would be for next year. Is that correct?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair Beamer. Staff would clarify that all of the recommendations would be acted on immediately. The shutdown change would be investigated for implementation as early as 2020, pending the results of the engineering review. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, seeing no further, could call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Sarah Hines, you have a question?
Just one question. Maybe we could discuss the impact of like mid-May, because our season usually like a bunch of kids swim till May. I don't know if we can be in discussion with that later about particulars like that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, that's been approved, and once again, thank you. Okay, we'll go back to the agenda, and we're now on item 4, Annex B of the agenda, which is the senior planner, the zoning amendment bylaw 310 for short-term rental accommodation, consideration of second reading and public hearing. So that's on page 37 of your agenda packages. And so, Mr. Seo, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. The SCRD's public consultation on short-term rental accommodation began in 2017 in accordance with a board-endorsed public engagement plan prior to the introduction of the proposed zoning bylaw amendments. The consultation process includes a series of information meetings, stakeholder meetings, workshops, agency and committee referrals, and online survey. The feedback review received indicates that the main issue is centered around the conflicts between the need of short-term rental accommodation as a business and the desire to maintain the character and livability of residential neighborhoods. The most problematic short-term rental accommodations appear to be those without on-site supervision. These issues call for a balanced approach, balanced solution that protects the quality of residential neighborhood and control the scale and operation of short-term rental business in an accountable manner. Despite the difference in terminology, short-term rental accommodation and bed and breakfast are very similar uses. A policy and regulation framework for bed and breakfast already exists in the official community plan and zoning bylaws, which sets a balance on the scale, intensity, and location of this type of uses. Such a balance is also important for maintaining the sustainable infrastructure and servicing. However, there is a lack of provisions on the operation aspects of the use. Therefore, staff recommend improving upon the existing conditions for bed and breakfast and expanding them to include other types of short-term rental accommodation, and introducing temporary use permits as a tool to manage off-site operators. Recommended changes for second reading of the bylaw include redefinition of bed and breakfast to include short-term rental accommodation and set the length of stay to 30 days, and setting a consistent standard for both bylaws in determining the average bedroom size and the total number of occupants based on 2 occupants per bedroom. The operator would have 2 management options, on-site or off-site with a temporary use permit. Attachment A to the report on page 48 of the agenda highlights the present zoning regulations, the regulations proposed at the time of first reading, and the regulation proposed for second reading. The temporary use permit is intended to help make off-site operators accountable and apply a level of enforceability. The permit requires an application fee, notification to neighboring residents, and building inspection. The permit is 3 years in length and can be renewed once before a new permit is required. The operator must reside within the Sunshine Coast Regional District and ensure the occupants comply with all applicable regulations. After 3 infractions of any terms, conditions, or applicable bylaws, the permit will be revoked. So in conclusion, the completed work on the short-term rental file has revealed a clear pattern of issues which call for a solution moving forward that maintains the balance between home and business and provides a tool to enable SDLE monitoring and to assist bylaw enforcement. Staff recommends second reading of the bylaws and holding of a public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarro. This report has been received, and I'll turn over to Director Tyers to make a comment.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to have a bit of a discussion around the board about a reasonable apprehension of bias in this matter. I just want to disclose that I have in the past, and me again in the future, have a short-term rental on my property. We stopped hosting at the end of 2018 because my wife's practice has become busier and she was doing most of the work. So there may therefore be a perception of bias in my participating in this matter. I have had some discussions with staff and fellow directors, and I believe that I should be staying at the table for the following reasons. Yes, I may host again in the future, but so could anyone here. It's really, anybody could become a short-term rental host later on today if they wanted to. So it's really, there's really no barrier to entry. There are hundreds of residents on the Sunshine Coast that already have short-term rentals, even though I have hosted in the past, I think I can have an open mind and act in the best interest of the community here. And also, the discussion here is not whether short-term rentals should be allowed or should not be allowed. It's more but how they should be implemented and regulated. And I think having some personal experience makes me a valuable contributor to the discussion here. And I'm also just one of 9 people on this board, so I think that the more voices are heard in this discussion, the better. So I just want to make full disclosure here, but I do believe that I have the responsibility to represent the greater interests of my community at the board table here, and you will see that my input will be fair and unbiased. And I will. My speaker went off. Sorry, how did that happen? Or was it off the whole time? Okay. No. Okay. So you'll see that I'm approaching this matter with an open mind, and I will be acting in the greater interest of the community. I welcome discussion from the board if you feel the need. Thank you.
Thank you. The report has been received. Turn over to the board for any further questions that they might have. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm kind of curious as to why we would want to limit bedroom size. Any thoughts on that? It seems to me if you limit the number of people that can use a bedroom, why the heck would you care what size it is?
Staff comments?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Bedroom size, the number of bedrooms, and the number of occupants are all interrelated elements to determine the scale and size of an operation in a dwelling. So the existing policy frameworks in the official community plans and zoning bylaws has already set a balance on the scale on how large an operation of a B&B can be run. So it's very important that the short-term rental use is limited to an auxiliary nature. So the the size of bedroom is an important element in determining the scale of the operation. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. So if, as you said, the argument is that we're limiting to an auxiliary nature, then by actually having off-site management, we're defeating that. So I think the two are inconsistent.
I asked a question relative to bedroom size. And full disclosure, I too used to operate a bed and breakfast, but it was in Houston, British Columbia, where it was literally the 1/4 of our house. It was a large log home, so it would have been about 750 square feet we had allowed. However, that included a living room, a bedroom, and a bathroom. Would all of that be covered in the 28 square feet, or would strictly the bedroom size be the defining characteristic? So if it was a suite, as was mentioned before, would that be defined within the 28 square feet, or would it square meters rather, or would it be the size of the bedroom within that unit?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. So on page 49 of the report, there is a definition for bedrooms. So the bedroom is defined as either an enclosed room or a contiguous floor space for the exclusive use for the bed and breakfast occupant. So that helps to clarify what space in the house is being used for the bed and breakfast guest.
Okay, Director McMahon?
Sure, I'll jump in here. I would love to see the B&B with a 28 square foot bedroom. That would be really interesting. Yeah, I think that this bylaw has come a long way. I think we're headed in the right direction. I like the TUP approach. I like the distinction between on-site operator and off-site, because that addresses the concerns of a lot of the community. I think we're still being a little too proscriptive here in terms of things like bedroom size and the number of people in bedrooms. It seems to me that we're looking at something that would be very hard to enforce. And, you know, at a later point, we need to have a broad discussion of bylaw enforcement in general, because it's a chronic problem in the rural areas. And, you know, it says in the report that throughout the consultation process, delay or lack of bylaw enforcement has been identified as a major issue. And so we can fix our regulations here. We're getting better. But we also have to address the other problem, which is we don't need to be putting in more bylaws we can't enforce.
Director Pratt.
Thank you. I would agree with Director McMahon's comments. The bylaw, I think, staff has done an amazing amount of work on this, and the engagement in the community's been fantastic. Because we all know, well, in being a realtor, I do know of like how many places on the coast operate like this. The 28 meter square, I do have a problem with that size. I know of a number of lofts or studio areas on the coast that are used as short-term rentals that are definitely larger than that. So they would be prohibited by that size. As a parent who has 3 children, and when traveling with them, even as young adults, to not share, not be able to share a same space, it's prohibitive for families. The 2 occupants. I think when my youngest 2, or well, actually when my kids were little, and Carly's 6 and Kim is 2 and Michelle's a few months old, this would mean that we'd have to actually have 3 bedrooms. And for, if traveling with my husband and for a family of 5, when really we could get away with 1 when you've got a toddler, a baby, and a young child. So I think we're still a little too restrictive in some cases with the size of the space as well, size of the bedroom in particular, and the number of occupants. I do worry about the enforcement on evenings and weekends, as is indicated in the comments as well. I'm happy with the TUP, what's suggested for the TUP, because it'll also help with our tourism stats on the coast, because we know that there's tons of these properties out there, but we have no way of capturing that data and knowing how many more people are coming into our community, using our water, using our solid waste facilities. And then the other thing that I noted in one of the comments was our noise bylaw takes into account excessive noise that's provided by machinery prior to 11 p.m., but maybe not necessarily due to partiers prior to 11 p.m. in a residential neighborhood. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Director McMahon? I'll go Director Seegers first.
Thank you. First of all, with regards to the comment that was made by Ian when he was doing the presentation around collaboration up and down the coast, I know that at the time that the Regional District was proposing doing consultation, both the Town of Gibsons and the District of Sechelt had requested that it be done as a collaborative effort, and that was denied by the Regional District. I was pretty disappointed about that, and I did follow up a few times. So just put that out there. So we're going to be playing catch-up to try and do some collaboration and some coordination among these documents up and down the coast. So put that aside. On page 44, number 5 says the authority to issue a temporary use permit is delegated to SCRD staff. Is it possible inside of our documentation or our processes to delegate it for this use only? Because we wouldn't want all temporary use permits to be delegated to staff. So that would be a staff question.
Staff, is that...
Thank you, Chair Beamish.
Joel?
Staff's understanding would be that, yes, that would be possible. Specifics for the purpose of the temporary use permit could be outlined in the delegation bylaw.
Thank you. Director Seegers?
Okay, so follow up on the temporary use permit. So again, during the presentation, it indicated that they would be okay with a fine of $500 first offense, $1,000 second offense, and the license revoked on the third. So I'm just looking at how does this actually, would this get implemented? If there's a fine, does that, the owner of the property gets fined, and how do we collect on that? And then if the license was revoked on the third, how is that revocation enforced?
Staff, have you considered that aspect?
Thank you. So there's a couple of pieces to this question and the escalating fine. So under the bylaw notice system, a maximum fine is $500. If we were to use the municipal ticket information system as well, we could go to $1,000, but that's the maximum in that case. In terms of revoking a permit, if an operator chose to continue to manage a short-term rental outside of the temporary use permit, then it would be a choice to be made as to an escalation of a bylaw enforcement process, whether that was pursuing a consent order, whether that was pursuing some sort of litigation, but it becomes a much more expensive enforcement option.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. You mentioned BENS, and I forget what the other one's called?
Municipal Ticket Information, MTI.
MTI, okay. So my understanding of this is BENS, we can actually issue via mail or whatever, but MTI actually has to be managed in person. So, yeah, it has to be served on the person. So if we're dealing with somebody who's not a local resident, then actually enforcement of that, or actually finding them, is difficult. So is it possible to increase the Ben's maximum, or is that a provincial legislation?
Staff?
Thank you. That's the maximum under provincial legislation. I do believe under the MTI legislation there is a provision for alternate service delivery, but I think that involves a process server and again, additional costs there. So the bylaw notice system does provide the most efficient use of time and resources for enforcement.
Follow-up, Director Seegers?
Yes, follow-up. Under Ben's, when we do a fine, it can also be per day, can it not?
Staff?
It can be per offense, yes.
One comment I could make, I echo Director Seeger's comments about coordination on the coast. We are also struggling with the same bylaw. We haven't gotten that far down the road yet, but one of the issues that came up to us, and it actually relates to my experience when I was acting CAO in Seashelt, and that is dealing with stratas. And where you have perhaps a strata unit that is operating as a short-term rental, and particularly an unoccupied short-term rental. So what we were talking about in Seashelt, or Gibson's rather, was that where the bed and breakfast or the offsite, the absentee owner lives in a strata unit, they must also provide a resolution from the strata council that authorizes short-term rentals within their strata buildings. That way, we're not the enforcer of the strata bylaws. They're simply, that's part of the approval process they had to go through, was to ensure that, okay, if you're going to come through as a strata, we don't want to be in the mix of your legal issues or be enforcement for the strata, because they often don't want to get involved after the fact. So that's one of the things we looked at there. But we will be dealing with this issue and closely following your progress, the regional district progress. Now, this is an issue that is only voted upon by areas A, B, D, E, and F, so it does not include at this point in time Seashelt and the town of Gibson. So, directors, I'll just ask further discussion. Director Ties?
Yeah, I've got a few things, but I don't want to hog the mic, so maybe I'll go for them one at a time. One suggestion that I had, rather than limiting things to 28 square meters or 2 people per bedroom, is to basically the option of just saying that only one party per short-term rental, and not limit the number of people, so that you're not creating a B&B where you could have multiple rooms to multiple parties, but just one party.
Is that a noisy party or a quiet party?
Well, and that at that point is then well taken. But I mean, that's what the offsite operator is there for. And connected with that, you know, in on page 45 in point 7, it says that, you know, issues should be addressed within 24 hours. Well, I don't think that's really acceptable if the neighbor is not getting any sleep. So I think issues should be addressed within 20 minutes, not 24 hours, so that if there is a complaint, that, you know, the operator is the offsite operator should be there within 20 minutes, which would then be connected once again with the requirement that the offsite operator be located on the coast, which I think is a little bit too large of an envelope, because if the offsite operator is located in Pender Harbor and there's short-term rentals in Langdale, he's not going to be there within 20 minutes. So I have a few more points, but I'll take it back to the board there.
Director McMahon.
Yes, I just want to ask a question about process here, because I think we have quite a few comments, and I think that the public is going to have quite a few comments too. So perhaps the best way to move this forward is, in fact, go to second reading, have the public hearing. So But my question is, how do we make sure to build in the meaningful consultation with Sechelt and Gibson's as part of that? Perhaps staff have a suggestion.
Staff, any comments on that? Mr. Hall.
Thank you, and thank you for the committee's patience, Chair Beamish. I'm not sure this is an answer completely, Chair, but two comments were that the bylaw was referred at first reading to our local government partners, and no comments were received at that time. And the second would be a general comment that there may be differences in the approach to regulation given the business licensing authorities of local governments. Although in saying that, staff take the point about clarity and communication related to any such future regulation as might emerge from this process or another local government's process. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a response from Gibson's. When the referral did come through to Gibson's, we did note some good ideas in your report that we asked our staff to kind of incorporate into their thinking in getting back to us, but it was not one of coordination at the time. So Director Hiltz.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. I'm going to follow up with Director McMahon that there's I would say gaps still in it, in our knowledge of what people want, and I'm prepared to kind of release it to the public. That's my sort of feeling, is that the staff has been on this since 2012. The technology keeps moving forward. We've been chasing it for 2012. Sechelt's been on this since 2005, so we're chasing it. So I'm thinking with all the gaps, I'm not sure if I want to be the chair for this public hearing, but I think it is kind of the time to kind of release it. In terms of the commonality between the local governments, the 30-day is one that I like to see, that it does separate out the issues between a landlord-tenant issue, which is if you have over 30 days, it starts to put guidelines on where long-term rental is and short-term rental, so I really like that. And 28 meters, yeah, I got an issue with 28 meters. 2 people per room, I got an issue with that, but I'm saying let the public have a hearing on it. That's my thinking on it.
Director Siggers.
Thank you. In response to staff's comment about no responses from Sechelt and potentially Gibson's as well, is I don't think we were ready for it at that point. We didn't know what to say because we hadn't done any public consultation. I think if we can take this back to our staff now, both of us have done public consultation. There's been extensive in Gibson's and in Sechelt, and I think our staff can come forward with some meaningful input at this point and look to, cooperation and collaboration around the document. I wanted to question staff on one of the pieces on page 49. It's bottom of it. It's 2BB, where it talks about except for provided for by section, whatever, other parts of the bylaw, the area utilized for bed and breakfast shall not exceed 2 bedrooms per dwelling. And how does that play out in the actual recommendation that's being brought forward?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. That particular provision is for certain zones like RU1A and RU1C. Those are site-specific zonings that allow more than 2 bedrooms. And the rest of the other zones permits 2 bedrooms. So that is a site-specific provision that has already been existent in Bylaw 310. Thank you.
Thank you. This is such a challenge when you're kind of trying to get so finite in terms of regulation. I'm reminded again, I'll go back to Houston, where we had a hotel operator, and the common complaint we had was that about 10 o'clock at night he did bed checks. He opened the doors, surprised the people in their beds to see how many people were in the room. And we had that complaint consistently, and it really was a challenge as a municipality. You have to keep going back to him and say, "You're not allowed to do this. Please don't do this." The other issue, of course, that's has almost overtaken this issue as far as our communities become concerned is affordable housing. And that was certainly part of our conversation with staff as to how do we kind of find that balance between everybody renting out their spare bedrooms and converting what is currently apartments into bed and breakfast type operations or short-term rentals, which were historically affordable housing units. And that's one of the challenges that all of our communities are facing as well. How do we find that balance? And it's a difficult one. But I appreciate the hard work that has gone into this. But I will refer to the rural directors as to where you want to take this at this time.
Okay, I'm perfectly prepared to go to hearing. I think we've had a good discussion here today, and I think it's best to move the recommendations 2, 3, 4, and 5 on page 37. So I would move that. Mark Mark's already said no. I'm perfectly happy to chair this unless there's another because I'll have had a public hearing under my belt up in Pender after next week, but I'm perfectly willing to put my name forward unless there's another director that has a burning desire, such as Director Hiltz, to put their name forward.
Director Seegers, I see your hand.
Thank you. Is there a requirement that it be a rural director chairing this, or is it just any director?
Staff?
Any director, they're saying.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if I'm available, I'd take on being the vice chair or the chair or whatever. I've had a fair amount of experience with these.
Okay, we've filled in those blanks. Unless anybody wants to challenge those two, Mr. Hiltz, would you challenge?
Well, just to go back to staff, is it any director, any board director?
CAO?
Thank you. It's the board is delegating, holding the hearing, and it's fine to have a municipal director as a chair of the public hearing.
Yeah. Okay, so seeing that, we have the 4 recommendations in front. We're not setting a date. Oh, we are scheduled for June 18, 2019 at 7 p.m. at the Seaside Center. Quickly checking calendars now. You're free? Okay. Okay, with that in mind, I'll call the question for the directors. I'm sorry?
Just to confirm, are we going to rock, paper, scissors, who chairs or vice chairs? Because we have to figure that out now if we're going to make the recommendation.
I had you as...
you have me as chair and you
right.
as vice chair?
Right.
Perfect,
exactly.
done.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. So everybody in agreement with that? So all in favor? Yeah. Opposed? Seeing none? Congratulations, you have a public hearing. Thank you. I'm going to call a 5-minute break at this point in time. If directors take a 5-minute break, please, and we'll be back. It's 11 o'clock now. Call the meeting back to order now. I'd like to move on the agenda to item 11, and that just concerns rural directors. So even though Seashell coming in late, I knew that. so that Mr. Powell is in the room, and I'd like to, with the board's indulgence, consider the frontage waiver application. Mr. Hall, are we prepared staff-wise to consider that? Did you need anyone else in the room? Okay, so if we could go then to item Annex I, item 11 on the agenda, and the frontage waiver for electoral area B. And I'll have staff present that, please.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. We are reviewing a subdivision, a two-lot subdivision on Red Roost Road in Half Moon Bay. The subdivision is compliant with both the official community plan and zoning bylaw 310. Both accesses presently a shared access off of Red Roost Road, and there is an undeveloped road allowance along the rear of the properties which could be used for access at a future time. In spite of access road frontage on the front and the back, the total perimeter of the parcels is less than 10% of the frontage along road. Thus, a waiver is required. We do support it and recommend that this waiver be endorsed and allow the subdivision to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, and go to Director Pratt.
Thank you. In light of staff and APC both in the community both supporting this application, I would support the application as well and would be happy to move this forward. Move the recommendation. Yes.
Do you have a seconder for the recommendation? Director McMahon. Discussion? Director Hills?
Yeah, just a question for staff. This is on page 251. It's the alternate septic fields. Is that coveted, or why is it there?
Staff, please.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Beamish. Standard practice when reviewing land subdivision in rural electoral areas is Vancouver Coastal Health will ensure that the applicant provide percolation testing and reserve an area for a septic field as well as additional area on the land for a reserve field should the primary area fail at some point in the future. Thank you.
Follow-up?
So is it coveted, or is it a question?
Mr. Allen?
Yes, thank you, Chair Beamish. Yeah, standard practice to reserve those areas as covenant for no build area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. See no further discussion. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. It's approved. Mr. Powell, thank you for your time of waiting. It was just that quick. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll go back to the agenda, and we're going to deal now with item number 5, and this is the Roberts Creek Official Plan Amendment Bylaw number 64110, 2018. And turn that also to staff for initial discussion.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Through the agency and committee referral and public information meeting process, the participants have expressed support for this proposed two-lot subdivision and the full development potential on each of the new lots if a subsequent subdivision is approved. Vancouver Coastal Health has evaluated the proposed septic field area on each of the proposed new lots and determined that the area are capable of sewage disposal that can meet standards of subdivision guidelines. So staff recommend moving forward to a second reading and holding of a public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion? Mr. Ties?
Yeah, I'd like to move the recommendations as listed, and I'd like to volunteer myself as the vice chair of that public hearing.
And do we have a chair for the public hearing?
I'm sure I'll volunteer.
Director Hiltz, thank you. So Director Hiltz is the chair and Director Ties is the vice chair. Any other challengers to that? Anybody else would rather do it? No? Thank you. Okay, the recommendations have been moved. Do we have a seconder to the recommendations? Seconded. Any further discussion? Director Pratt?
Sorry, it didn't actually go on. Oh, you know what? I hadn't gone far back enough in my package, so I'm just going to turn.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no discussion, all in favor? Thank you, it's passed. Thank you. That's approved. We'll now go on to Annex D, which is the consultation process for BC Timber Sales License A91376. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Following from the letter received from Minister Donaldson and acting on board direction, staff prepared a consultation process, or a public participation process to use SCRD language, plan for the timber sale license area in the Reed Road Forest. As shown in the attachment to the report, preliminary analysis using SCRD's public participation toolkit points towards a process that has two streams, one very broad and is aimed at providing information and gathering information, and a more focused process involving stakeholders experiencing a greater level of impact in a discussion or engagement process. The analysis suggests that because there are multiple diverse and complex issues that require stakeholder dialogue, thinking in terms of an 8 to 12-month process may be appropriate. Because getting design right for public participation, including confirming goals and identifying stakeholders, is critical to achieving objectives, staff recommend that the preliminary analysis be shared intergovernmentally with SCRD advisory groups and with stakeholders to seek comment. Staff can then prepare an update report with specific public participation recommendations and associated financial implications. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Discussion? Director McMahon.
Well, I won't quite go crazy. No, I would like to thank staff for providing a way forward here in a sticky issue, and I appreciate that we are being, I think, proactive in this case. And yes, I think that with some effort we can come up with a process that is transparent to the public, but that doesn't devolve into a public shouting festival. The timeline seems reasonable given the complexity of the issues. Now, one question I did have is the public participation document that's in here that you used. Is this part of the referral that will be sent out to the public? Is it part of the report?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Yes, the attachments would form part of the referral package. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Okay. Well, in that case, on page 128, there is a statement that at the current time, staff do not believe that no harvesting ever is an option. And it's, let me just find page 128 here for a minute.
It's under the
Yeah, I got it. So, you see, we're defining the parameters of the process in contradiction of our previous stance on this block, because our previous stance as of December the 13th was that the SCRD wishes the block to be protected from logging and reserved for public use and ecological integrity. So to start off the process by basically contradicting our own stance on this is not where I would like to go. You know, if we start by stating that logging is non-negotiable, then we've just given up the battle. So I would like to see some changes to this.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. The attachment as drafted is intended to represent the best available information that staff have. And so staff would stand by the statement as written. If the committee feels that it's not helpful to the process of of moving forward into a public participation process. That's understood, and certainly there would be an opportunity to revise this still preliminary analysis if the committee so chose. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I'll respond to that piece first and then go to mine. So it says, at the current time, staff do not believe that no harvesting ever is an option the province will consider. I don't believe that this is referring to that block itself, but no harvesting ever on the Sunshine Coast is not a stance that the province will ever support. And I don't think our residents here on the Sunshine Coast would support that either. It's more a negotiation of where it is. So if you want to respond to that first before I go on.
Okay. In the section directly above that, though, it refers specifically to the Reed Road Forest. So that's one of the things here that we could look at is defining the scope. Are we primarily doing this as almost a test case for engagement around logging? In which case, yeah, I do see your point. But if we're referring specifically to this cut block, then it's a different issue. And the residents did raise that with me.
So that could be clarified in that it's referring to the Sunshine Coast, maybe. So staff do not believe that no harvesting ever on the Sunshine Coast is an option the province will consider. That would be a... Right. Whatever. So they can look at that piece. Page I was referring to or looking at, let me go back to it. Sorry. Let me find the page. On page 110. This is looking at financial implications. It says that, while the minister and BC Timber Sales are indicating that we need to have public participation, some kind of process with a hired facilitator, there's been no scope of services or process agreed upon and no identification of who's going to pay for it. So how do we move that piece forward? Are we assuming that we're going to take on the cost of this, or are we looking to BC Timber Sales to share the cost with us, given that the work of this will inform the ongoing process? And I'd look to staff, because it says, based on input received, a project budget and funding options, including partnerships and grants, can be prepared and presented in a report. So it's not identified at this point.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. The Director's reading of that section is correct. At this time, we're not clear what we're planning for, so it makes establishment of a budget difficult. But to affirm what's in the report, there is no budget. There are no resources available in current operating budgets to support a project of the scale that might be implied by the preliminary analysis, nor has any conversation about responsibility for those costs or opportunities to draw in new outside resources been undertaken. Thanks.
Okay, Director Pratt.
Thank you. And I think that's probably my biggest concern as well, is that we know that we have a very different idea of what we want to do for consultation versus the other party. We want to have very much more community collaborative approach to how we consult on this issue, and I'm wondering what our next, do we need to advocate for some funding or question the province on where we could potentially access some funding for this, because we know it's dire need to have it a more open community consultation, not just a one meeting and not one meeting behind closed doors. With the other entity, we need to have more conversation around this. So I'm wondering if we know of any avenues, if staff knows of any avenues that we could pursue on that, because our budget is getting, our budget is stretched on this, but it's something we need to do.
Staff, any thoughts on that? Would it be appropriate, I guess my question is, to put a further recommendation in that that staff be directed to request a budget or funding assistance or a funding from the province for this process and gauge their response? How does the board feel about that? Yeah, all you can do is ask. They've asked us to do a process, and we're trying to comply with a comprehensive process. If you feel that's appropriate additional reference to put in there. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Staff have no objections, and
okay.
That would be helpful to next steps.
Add some wording around that.
Thanks.
Question I have is the second recommendation there, and that is on the comment on the public participation process. And I wondered there whether BCTS or Flynn Road should be part of the referred to them for comment on the process as well as I note on page 129, or that the internal stakeholders, the next reference talks about the stakeholders. I assume that list on page 129, page 8 of the workbook, page 129 of our agenda, is the stakeholders will be consulted as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Some of which there's an overlap, but I appreciate that. Yeah.
The third recommendation covers all of the stakeholders identified.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because we're going to ask the province to consider paying for it, should we refer the process to them as well and ask them for comments as to whether they feel that's a thorough and or does the application take care of that? Or does our workbook take care of that? Director Seegers?
So if I look at the recommendations as written, the last recommendation refers to financial implications. Just above that is that we're looking for feedback from stakeholders, but we haven't identified who's going to pay for it and what that's going to look like. So I think if we're going to do this, we need to reorder these somehow so that staff actually approach the province, come back and let us know, yes, we've got funding from them, or no, we don't, and we need to figure out some other way to do this. Before we actually, the referral to the various organizations, that's fine, because that's not going to involve any cost on our part, really. So a little bit of staff time, but the next piece can be quite costly, and we haven't sorted that piece out.
How does staff feel about that, referring it then to the province with a request for funding assistance?
Thank you for the question, Chair Beamish. The third recommendation regarding stakeholders would include those stakeholders identified on page 130, which would include both BC Timber Sales and Flynn Road. And the conversation conversation about financial support can be undertaken in the scope of talking about the process. The staff, I guess, would recommend approaching this process in a stepwise way, where we define what it is we need and how we feel it should happen with input from stakeholders prior to or at least leading the conversation about financial resources, to ensure that we're doing the right thing and not doing what we can with the resources available. And recognizing that this process will take some time, staff feel that there is time to step out the first step of figuring out what we need to accomplish here before we then go back to talk about resources. But certainly the efficiency of combining the conversation when reaching out to stakeholders who may be in a position to provide financial support is not lost on staff. Thank you.
Okay. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I went over the list of stakeholders on page 130, and I think you have pretty much nailed them all.
Yeah.
So And I support the idea of having a proper process, because up to this point we have not had a process. We've had a series of reactions. And so I really welcome the opportunity to do this properly.
Director Lee.
I was wondering where we are in our overall process, because our request is actually to be involved in Crown land use planning, and we have several proposals out there to UBCM and to the government themselves. This seems like an awful good first step, but I don't know how it fits into the bigger picture. I don't know whether it's consultation or it's engagement with the local government, or so as to where we are in the journey to getting a say into Crown land use. I think this is a great first step, but I'd like to know if it's the final step or the start.
This, as I understand it, deals with one parcel only, sort of thing, and not generally the coast issues. So, Director Hills, did you want to comment on that?
Sure. I'm moving it forward, and stepwise, and it's a process, and I'm in favor of moving it forward. There's a lot of transparency and I think accountability in the proposal. So I'm very much in favor of it.
Any further discussion from staff relative to Director Lee's question as to this vis-a-vis broader planning of forestry use on the coast?
Thank you, Chair. As noted in the analysis attached to this report, staff see that there could be lessons from this approach that may apply in other cases on the Sunshine Coast, or more generally to forestry activities in the province, and can see some alignments with some of the ministry and industry level conversations about relationships with communities around forestry activities. Staff are aware there are a number of land use planning initiatives underway on the coast, and would be looking, should this move forward or when this moves forward, would be looking for ways to align this work and have it benefit rather than contradict or compete with those other initiatives. But in this particular case, and on this particular proposed timber sale license, the minister has indicated a desire to have a community conversation, and so this is SCRD's opportunity to take a leadership role in that and make it fit and benefit some of the other things that are going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Just further to GM Hall, this morning on the news, they're going through the meaningful consultation. Port Renfrew is going through this in an old growth management area, so there's other instances where this seems to be happening throughout the province as well. So,
Director Lee?
Yes, I was making my comments on the subject after reviewing of the land use planning for the SCRD, and one of the principal functions is facilitate citizen participation in the land use process, and I think this definitely furthers that. So I was speaking in favor of it, just wondering if we could leverage for more.
Yeah.
And also, I think we have to be careful about who pays for it.
Yes. Well, I think that, did we add that, did we agree to add that to final additional resolution to ask the province in the process as to whether their contribution, whether they'll pay for it, how they'll pay for it, how they'll contribute to the process? Do we have some wording around that? Yeah. Okay. Could you share it, please? Thank you.
And that staff be directed to request funding assistance from the province for the consultation process.
Okay. That's a good start. And so, no further discussion? Is there further discussion? Director McMahon?
I would be fine with moving this so long as we are clear that that sentence on page 128 is amended to say no harvesting ever on the Sunshine Coast. And then I can go forward with it.
Staff understand that amendment and agree to that in? Okay. Director Pratt?
I just wanted to commend staff on how quickly this all came about, and very appreciative that we're taking a strong leadership role in this consultation process. So thank you.
Director Seegers?
Sorry, could you repeat that? You're requesting that it say that we are looking at having no harvesting on the Sunshine Coast ever?
It was in fact your suggestion. So it will now read, at the current time, staff do not believe that no harvesting ever on the Sunshine Coast is an option. Okay.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, I turned it around in my head.
So with that, Director Pratt?
I was just going to move the recommendations as
Thank you. I
as
was hoping we were going to get there.
Yes,
Okay.
well, trying to move.
Good. Seconded. Okay, all in favor? Or discussion? Okay, sorry.
Are we voting on this amendment to direct staff?
No, we haven't moved the recommendations yet, so that now we're moving the recommendations that includes the additional resolution. Yeah, and the additional resolution of funding. Yeah. So, okay, all in favor? Okay. Thank you. So it passed. I might make him a suggestion, and that is we keep keep the minister in the loop and copy him on the correspondence we send out to BCTS or Flynn Road, just so he knows that this is moving forward, and that we know he knows it's moving forward. Director McMahon?
Perhaps keep our MLA in the loop as well, because there's been a lot of participation from that office.
Okay, moving now to Annex E, which is interjurisdictional invasive plant management strategy. And Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Last year, SCRD initiated work on a regional interjurisdictional invasive plant management strategy with staff from municipalities, First Nations, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, Vancouver Coastal Health, and School District 46. A consultant-prepared draft was produced using grant support and is attached to this report. The consultant's work has concluded and the grant activities have now been completed. The purpose of the report in front of the committee today is to share analysis of the draft strategy and seek direction on next steps. The draft is robust and detailed. In moving from a draft to an actionable approach, staff have three key observations. First, the need to determine leadership and resourcing. The draft places high reliance on the Intergovernmental Invasive Species Working Group, which has so far been largely focused on information exchange and coordination. Many activities, such as outreach and education, are already undertaken by the Coastal Invasive Species Council. Some activities would be a challenge to fit into existing SCRD service areas. Consideration by the SCRD and by interjurisdictional partners about roles is recommended. Secondly, prioritization is needed. The draft strategy does not include an order of operations or a sense of what is most important or impactful. As shown in the table of staff's analysis, which is also attached, a preliminary scaling into short, medium, and long term has been suggested based on relationships between activities. Progress on action is, of course, dependent on resourcing. And third, disposal is a key need. And this speaks in part to the second point about sequencing or prioritization. Obviously, disposal solutions need to be factored into upstream activities like education and removal activities. So bearing in mind those three key observations, staff recommend that this report, with the draft strategy and accompanying analysis, be referred to the Interjurisdictional Working Group and to SCRD advisory commissions and committees to identify priorities and collaboration opportunities, and that staff engage the Coastal Invasive Species Council in dialogue about partnership opportunities, and finally that staff provide an action-based report to a fourth quarter committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Directors? Director Seegers?
I have a few things here. First of all, I want to thank staff for taking the lead on this up and down the coast. It's been a conversation that actually has made it to the wider population. I saw a posting actually on Facebook yesterday. Somebody was offering some plants to somebody else from their yard, and somebody else piped up and said, "Don't get rid of it. It's an invasive species. It's, so don't take it, don't buy it, don't put it in, dig it out, get rid of as much as you can." So there is a conversation in the broader community. So, and the SCRD took the lead on that. So I want to say thank you for that work. I do recognize that disposal is a big issue. I can't say much, but I can say that in Sechelt we're working on a potential solution for that, and within a month we should probably have something, hopefully have something we'll be able to announce about that. So that may be something that's going away. I do know that Gibsons and Sechelt, our parks staff, actually work on this in our jurisdiction. So in Sechelt, I know Perry has mapped out in the district exactly where all the invasive species are, what, if it's on our property, on other property. We're not so good at having residents take care of it, but District of Sechelt, we're doing a pretty good job. There's been some that have been eradicated already. So that's good. I guess one of the questions I have then is what's happening in the regional district with regards to, I know roadsides are MOTI, which regional district doesn't have any say over. What about parks? Is that something that the regional district actually has a plan and is moving forward on stuff? Like what is the policy? What's happening in the regional district?
Mr. Hall?
Thank you for the question, Chair Beamish. So for SCRD services where staff may encounter invasive species in the course of their duties, regardless of where it occurs, or for those who are managing SCRD lands, staff do have training on identification and appropriate treatment. In terms of parks, the regional district does take note when invasive species are observed in the course of inspections and undertakes to treat them when possible. I would say that our approach to invasive species in parks could certainly be formalized, and some of the knowledge exchange opportunities that are identified as opportunities in the analysis that's provided with this report would be opportunities for the regional district to benefit from the progress that other local governments and other land managers on the coast have made. Thank you.
Thank you. I would request actually that a copy of this be formally referred also to the town of Gibsons. I know staff will get it, but I'm not certain that it will come forward by them on an agenda. I don't see Sechelt wants it referred to council as well. I believe they do. So they'll be added on number 3, just add District of Sechelt and town of Gibsons there. And if anybody doesn't know what knotweed looks like, visit the lot behind the A&W in Gibsons. It was a lot that was cleared last year, and in clearing the lot, the knotweed was spread, and it is a knotweed forest coming up this year. I have brought it to the attention of staff, and they are dealing with the owner on it, but if you want to see what knotweed looks like and see what it can look like as a forest, it is behind the A&W. So, Director Ties.
Yeah, further to that, corner of Woodley and Lowell Road is also a great spot. So yeah, that's, I guess that sparks the question as to, in MOTI right-of-way, who's responsible for invasive species control. And then I'd also like to have this report referred to the Roberts Creek OCP committee, because it kind of spreads the word in the community, and it helps. I think we've got some community initiatives already around some of the spots that have had knotweed in the past, and there's some areas that are now nicely under control. So if we can start spreading the word, then that would be great. So the OCP committee would be great if we could refer that to them.
And Director Lee?
It's a great report. I think, though, that what we need to do is to make sure we handle all of the aspects of getting rid of, well, first of all, identifying what an invasive species is, and then how to get rid of it.
Yeah.
In our area, we've been tackling the broom for quite a while. Think you've got one gone, and the next thing you know, it's thicker than it used to be. And also, what is an invasive species to be addressed? If you try to kill the blackberries in some places, the residents will get you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and disposal, we recently cleared some property off of the Sarah Ray Hall, and the only thing we could do with the broom was to burn it, and that's not necessarily the right option. So, disposal is very important. So, it'd be great if we had a package that we could put together and give to the community groups to look after things for us. We can't afford to do everything that needs to be done as the SCRD. It would be very expensive. But the education out there is quite good, and you get a lot of people that want to help. And you get a lot of people that want to look after their own property, but can't seem to make it go away forever. So if we had a nice package that addressed all that, it would go a long way towards helping the issues. So thanks.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, just a question. The consultant who wrote the report is not named anywhere in the report. That struck me as rather curious. So perhaps it should be signed. I agree. Disposal is a key part of this problem, or part of the solution, and also working with the municipalities so that the SCRD can formalize our corporate plan for taking care of invasive species on our own properties.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. The report that's in here is actually really good. If that could be sent out to some of the residents. It's quite wordy and quite long, but so extracts. One of the things and I'm trying to find the website now. The invasive plant species website, whatever that's called. There it indicates in the report here and on the website that there is a map where you can plot the instances of invasive plants in your area. And I know previously it worked. I checked the link last night actually, and it didn't work. It says the page isn't available. So I'm wondering if that's still, just a glitch on their end, or if it's something that they're no longer managing, or if we could see how we could make sure that happens, because people could actually send in information, and then it actually would show us exactly where on the Sunshine Coast that. Yeah. But it doesn't, if we go to the website, I tried to get to the map and it just came up, page not found.
Yeah, the app works great.
Okay.
Director Hiltz?
I'll verify the first instance, but yeah, the map is up and it's in functioning and ready to go. So
on the website?
I think I got it off of the SCRD link off of their own website, but yeah, it was working.
I went to,
So what's the changes that were identified primarily on the referrals to District of Sechelt, Town of Gibsons, and the Robert Creek OCP Committee? Are there any other changes to the Director Hills?
One of the pieces is the commercial side. It's the nurseries and the garden clubs. It seems to be always, and they're very dominant, the Sechelt and the Gibsons Garden Club. So I'm wondering, is this an appropriate thing to send out to them?
Botanical gardens.
They've all been involved in the issue, and they seem so. There isn't a public participation. So I'm wondering if a referral of the report is reasonable.
Staff, is 3 more letters to write, or a few more letters to write? Are you comfortable with that? Okay, thank you. So referring to appropriate garden agencies. Director Lee.
I think I'd be remiss in saying that our the previous boards here at the SCRD had done a lot of work on this, and they did relax the regulations so we could use herbicide everywhere, which was a big step.
Yeah.
And so I think it's up to us to try and finish it off now. And this homeowner's guide to the Scotch broom that was in the in basket was a great thing, and if we could have something like that for all the invasives, I think just something that simple would sure help.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. Perhaps we could have an agenda item on our transportation transportation committee agenda, asking MOTI what they're doing around invasive species along the highways.
Okay.
I know there's a huge patch around Roberts Creek area on
That's
the
right.
highway
You're up
that
and down,
leans over. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and so bicyclists have to really go around.
Well, and you would know that now.
Yes.
All right, I think, did I detect you're also moving the resolutions?
Sure.
Okay. Seconder? Thank you. Further discussion? All in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for that. We are a talkative bunch this morning, I can tell by the clock. We have already dealt with Annex F. We'll move on now to Annex G, which is the Harbor Authority Pender Harbor Sewage Treatment Plant License Agreement Renewal. And Director Lee?
Yes, I'd like to recuse myself from this as I am a director on the Harbor Authority.
Okay. So you could check on lunch for us then, please.
Okay, I'll go see. I'll go test it for you.
Okay, on this one, this is rural planning, so that it's been received. So discussion. Director Hiltz.
Yeah, to staff. So this looks like a pretty routine thing, and it's been renewed. I think there was a 10-year agreement and a 3-year agreement, and now we're going to a 5-year agreement. And my real question is there's no SCRD asset. This is about just a disposal field. And the other bit, is it land disposal? Is there an outfall related to this facility? I couldn't find that out.
Mr. Allen, I'm sorry, I should have invited you to jump right in there from the onset, but have answered all that questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Not a problem. This is a piece of our land at the Pender Harbor Cultural Center that we're using simply to host their septic treatment system. It does not contain an ocean outfall, but it is the adjacent upland to their use, which is located at the head of the wharf at the Mid-Year Park.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Someone move the resolution? Moved by Director Pratt, Director McMahon. All in favor? Okay, that's approved. Somebody could let Mr. Lee know that his lunchtime is over. And we'll move to Annex H, and this is Whispering Firs Park, and refer this firstly to the Parks Planning. So she's not here, so who's going to take that? Okay, Mr. Allen.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Beamish. This is building upon a report received by committee in February of this year based upon a request from the Wood Creek Park Neighborhood Association to consider a change of name to the Whispering Firs Park adjacent to Highway 101 and adjacent to the Whispering Firs subdivision. It was referred to the Elphinstone Advisory Planning Commission. We hosted an online questionnaire and received over 200 responses. The overall, staff feel the sentiment is to retain the present name, and that would be our recommendation in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yes. 200, we really have an engaged community here. As much as I miss the opportunity to have Wood Creek Park, I think that staff has made the right call here. And I raised it with the Wood Creek Park Neighborhood Association, and they said they'll basically stand down on this one. And I raised it last night at the Community Association for Elphinstone, and there were no diehard supporters there either. So I would support staff's recommendations, although I do note that there originally was a recommendation that transit staff review the consistency of bus stop names in the area. So just to make sure that that was followed up on.
You move the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move the recommendation.
And seconded. Further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Annex I we've dealt with, so we're going to move to Annex J now, which is the meeting notes for the Ports Monitor Committee. Is there anything arising from those? We have received them. Director McMahon?
I was just wondering why we were getting the minutes from July 2018 at this point.
Mr. Hill? Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. Staff aren't. This committee meets twice a year, and so staff always endeavor to ensure that the minutes are ready prior to the next meeting, which staff will be working to schedule late in the spring or early in the fall. And so preparation of meeting notes follows that timeline rather than, for example, advisory planning commissions that meet every month. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Seegers?
Thank you. Given this committee only meets, what you said, twice a year, perhaps the minutes should not necessarily go back to the committee for approval before coming here, because that means it's 6 months before anything that they bring up there actually shows up at this table. It might be that the process needs to be looked at so that they come back here in case there's some action or something we need to take.
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to my earlier comment, had there been actionable recommendations requiring committee decision, the timeline for preparing these and bringing them forward might have been different. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
I had a general process question about these minutes. For instance, the Transportation Committee minutes have come forward here. I actually have some corrections to make to those, but if they've come to us, then are we approving them? So how does this work? Because we can't amend their minutes.
We're receiving them.
We're receiving them. So if they get changed, then do we re-receive them?
There will be resolutions within the context of some of these minutes that we'll need to approve, but in terms of the minutes themselves, I think we would change those at the table again. I would assume, well, all the members on here, obviously, so to discuss them. CAO?
Thank you. I guess the one piece I'd add to that is if the amendment that you're proposing is to an actual recommendation that is requiring an action by the board, the committee here has, as they go through the process of endorsing those recommendations, can certainly change them because they are actions that the SCRD as a whole would be responsible for undertaking and not the committee itself.
Director McMahon?
In my case, it was merely corrections and clarifications.
Of the, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so so then we've dealt with the ports. Everybody understands that. We have received that document. Policing Committee, we have received it. There are recommendations in that report, specifically recommendation number 2, which is the changes to the terms of reference, and recommendation number 3, which is the renaming of the committee. The other recommendations are internal to the committee of receiving reports. So unless I think we need a resolution relative to approving recommendations numbers 2 and 3 of those minutes. Director McMahon? Okay. Director Seegers? All in favor? Oh, Director Hills?
Probably number 7 should be in there as well then, because that's a...
Yeah, the committee invite, I looked at that, I did mark that, and I just wondered, but it's no problem, we can do that. This is recommendation 7 as well, the committee invite Vancouver Coastal Health and request a presentation of the relationship between mental health and policing in the next meeting. So, okay, we'll include that in the resolution. Okay, so that all in favor? approved. Those are approved. Director Seegers?
Yeah, process question then. With regards to recommendation number 7, is this something that staff would take on, or is it up to the chair to do this? Who actually would reach out to Vancouver Coastal Health?
To invite them to the next policing committee meeting, is this staff? Okay. Okay. So staff, the support for that committee? Okay, thank you.
It says it in recommendation, but I didn't read it.
Okay, we're moving now to the Transportation Advisory Committee. It's already been received. And there are, again, a number of recommendations in that. The recommendation number 2, specifically recommendation number 3, and recommendation number 4. No recommendation was receiving. Busy meeting there. And recommendation number 6. So specifically, first of all, let's move to the minutes themselves, because I understand there are some changes to be. So Director McMahon,
I just had some clarifications on page 259.
259?
Oops. Am I on the... No, I'm on the wrong one. Oh, well, that was the policing committee. Sorry. It just said speeding in the Cedar Grove area, and what they really meant was Cedar Grove School area.
Okay.
But on page 264 then, I just thought it would be clarify, it's the 4th bullet point at the top of the page. It says District of Sechelt owners donating parts of road back to the district, and that's in return for a charitable tax receipt, because otherwise it doesn't explain the point. On page 269, there's a reference to line painting. Let me just find it out. It's sort of in the middle of the page. Road painting is contracted out. Center line, lane, and fog lines are repainted every year. That's only on Highway 101.
So 269?
We're page 265, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th paragraph. So the lines are repainted every year on the highway. Yep, that's it.
So in terms of the recommendations to be approved by this committee,
2, 3, and 6.
Sorry?
2, 3, and 6.
2, 3, and 6. Yeah, I think that's. These are others, or Director McMahon?
I don't think we have to. Recommendation 3 is just to receive a report.
Yeah.
We already received it in another committee, so
Yes.
we don't have to re-receive it. So I think it's just 2 and 6.
Okay. Recommendations 2 and 6. Everybody's comfortable with that. You care to move those, Director McMahon?
I'll move them.
Seconded. Director Ties, all in favor? Thank you. It's approved. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to go now to, we're now into the area meetings. So Annex M, that's being received. Is there anything arising from Annex M? This is Egmont Pender Harbor. We've dealt with. No. Half Moon Bay, Area B, Annex N. They'd be moved. They were moved already. Yeah. 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 Director Pratt?
Just something that came up at the APC in Half Moon Bay was the, and it's under here under new business, the Woodbury Heights subdivision. And it just want to flag that for staff. It doesn't need to be, we don't need to have a conversation at this table, but just maybe somewhere else. There was, originally there was an ecological reserve designated by the original developer, or parkland, I should say, and then it's now disappeared. And so it's something that was flagged and at the APC, and I think I'll probably just talk with staff separately after, but just wanted to flag that. So
thank you. Yeah. So Annex O, Roberts Creek. Do you have anything rising from your minutes? Hearing none, we'll go to Annex P, Elphinstone. Anything arising, Director McMahon?
There was a discussion by email about the minutes, but I think I'm going to wait and we'll have that discussion at the next APC meeting, which won't be, I believe our next one was canceled due to lack of agenda. So, but it'll go back there and won't do it here.
Annex Q, West Howe Sound. Director Hiltz, nothing rising, thank you. Annex R, Agricultural Advisory Committee. There is a recommendation on page 283. There's actually a question on 283 at the top of the page. Can the SCRD provide bulk purchasing opportunity for irrigation equipment, rainwater purchasing systems for farmers? SCRD has rainwater harvesting rebate program. Group purchases for farmers can possibly be implemented to the institute. The question was, could it be done can the SCRD do that for farmers? Any thoughts on that, staff? No. Are you aware of any opportunities there? No. Director Seegers, while they're deliberating?
On page, 284?
284, yeah.
Yeah, page 284, under Drought Management Plan Amendments. The second half of that, they came out with some points, and I'm wondering, I haven't taken this back to our Drought Management Plan to see whether or not this has been addressed in there or not. So I'm looking to staff to see, have these been addressed? If not, is it something that we'd want to look at?
Staff, in response on either of those questions? Yeah.
I'll take the first one last. Thank you, Chair. On the drought management plan, the conversation was held in advance of preparation of the report that was later considered by a committee. So staff at this table can confirm that at a high level, definitely these comments were considered in the preparation of drought management plan updates. And on the other question, the discussion that occurred at the meeting was in part about the role that the Farmers Institute could play in bulk purchasing, and there was no focused question put to the SCRD about a role in a future program, but of course staff would be open to considering an appropriate role for the regional district if the Farmers Institute or farmers in general were looking for a partner for some kind of water conservation program. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Seegers?
Thank you. I don't remember where I saw it in here, but I did note that there was a request that the District of Sechelt non-potable supply be made available to farmers. So I will take that back to staff.
Okay. And recommendation number 3, on page 283, says the Agricultural Advisory Committee recommend that a formal request for SCRD board to invite MLA Nicholas Simons as a member. Sorry?
Sorry, we missed recommendation number 2.
Recommendation number 2. Yeah, we could do that as well, sort of thing. So recommendation 2 and 3 in the report be endorsed by the board. One's an updated agricultural water use study be completed in 2020 for all commercial farmers. Once all are metered, and that they be involved in terms of reference, and then a formal letter to Nicholas Simons to invite them to a committee. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I just wanted to get back to staff on with the question about the water use study. Is this feasible? And presumably we'd need to build it into the budget process. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Staff believe that the agricultural water demand model and land use inventory project in partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture that was subsequently considered by the Infrastructure Services Committee would achieve the intent of the recommendation as framed here, and thus the budget for that project is available in 2019 based on information that staff have about that project at this time. Thanks.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I think the committee had in mind the study that was done in 2014 when the water meters first came in to the farms, and perhaps they might want to revisit that recommendation in view of the results of the other study. Just a thought.
Or did you want to move both those recommendations at this time?
I'm not sure whether we want to move number 2 at this
Okay,
point.
all right.
Are we committing to that at this point?
You'll move number 3.
I'll move number 3,
Okay.
sure.
Someone seconder? Okay. Director Hilt, you have your microphone on. Did you have a question? Okay. Okay. All in favor then of recommendation number 3? Thank you. We're getting there. Move on to correspondence. We have 3 items of correspondence. BC Ferries key stakeholder update. Any discussion of that item? Is this something we'd like to refer to the Transportation Committee for information? Okay. No motion to refer to the Transportation Committee. Moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. See no discussion of it. Next item is from Sharon Gregerson for $10 day child care campaign. We have received these items, so that just is any discussion of them. Director McMahon?
Yeah, if we were going to write to we're being asked to
put on the list, yeah.
Yeah, to be put on the list. We just have that concern, as you know, in my area about the private 24-hour daycares that are not being covered by this plan. Mm-hmm. And so there are some concerns with this plan. I mean, daycare, good, lovely, but it needs some work. Yeah. So I'm not going to try and craft something on the fly, but I just wanted to flag that this is an issue.
There is a resolution suggested here. Have we already dealt with this issue at some point in another way? No. Director Tyus?
My question is that if we support the $10 a day child care plan, does that mean that the SCRD donates $10 a day, or that we're just supporting it?
Supporting the provincial plan, yeah. Yeah. Director Seegers?
Thank you. This isn't actually from the government.
No.
Right? This is a coalition of Child Care Advocates of BC and Early Childhood Educators of BC. They proposed this, and they're just looking to get support from governments in their lobby efforts to the government to support reduced child care costs. So District of Sechelt and I think the town of Gibson's both joined on when it came out way back when. So they're just saying, do you want your name added to the list?
Somebody care to move the resolution that's proposed? Director Hiltz, moved. Okay, no seconder. We'll move on. Yeah, I could turn the page. Yeah. Okay. Final item is Vancouver Coastal Health letter regarding response for proposed login on 13/13. Okay, we have received it. Is there anything further that the board would like to do with it? When we receive these letters, do we automatically acknowledge them in some way and just receive them? I guess that's for CAO.
Well, it depends on the context, but this Vancouver Coastal Health letter, I acknowledge receipt of the email to Dr. McKee.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, seeing no further discussion of that matter, I don't have any more on my list. No new business. We're not going to adjourn this meeting to in camera. Motion to adjourn. All in favor? And inquiries. Gosh, you guys sit here all through a meeting and nobody has any questions to ask. We must be doing a darn good job. Thank you for that. So we will now, we are adjourned, and we will come back.